Hey gang, since last we spoke, I've been working on a couple different parts of the boat, and after, I don't know, a year of talking about it, it's time to take on the sheerstrakes.
Oh, the water. Oh, the water. Oh, the water. Hope it don't rain all day.
All right, so now that I've got the boat flipped over, it's time to pay attention to the sheerstrakes again. And I've got one of these like halfway shaped and contoured a good bit of the way there. And I'm just really dissatisfied with white oak for the sheerstrakes. I know white oak is a difficult wood to deal with. And I think especially so when you've got to do these kind of like rounded contours with a rounded plane. And so thinking about seeing how the boat looks, seeing how the mahogany on the transom looks, I think maybe it's a good idea to go mahogany for the sheerstrakes as well as the combing, where I was going to do white oak. And then it'll also make it easier to work. And so like the combination of those two things, that'll look good and that it'll be easier to work, are pretty appealing. And so I've got to scarf together a couple of pieces of mahogany to get these ready to cut and shape and contour. So we're starting this process again. All right, so I've got the mahogany planking stock scarfed and we'll see how that turns out. With that, I do a coating on both sides of the contact face of just plain unthickened epoxy. And then I go mix up a little bit more, thicken it, and then spread it so that if the wood is thirsty and it pulls anything out, basically it's got time to pull the epoxy into it, leaving thickened epoxy in the middle of that sandwich to kind of form the bond. All right, we are shaped and we are roughly contoured on the starboard side sheerstrake. And I don't know, man, I'm liking how it's looking. Basically, I don't have it rounded. You can still see there's a gap there. I don't have it rounded, contoured. Basically, I just have it kind of straight planed from the inboard edge, like the keel side edge, up to about halfway. So that's just kind of like a straight diagonal to get it to appropriate widths. All right, we finally got a clear, mild day, and basically the starboard sheerstrake is as good as it's going to get in terms of its shaping and contouring. I've actually already fastened it in a couple of the station frames amidships, and it's time to steam the fore end as it kind of twists, not just bends, but twists up towards the stem. So taking a tip from a shipwright, I'm going to bag the, I don't know, first 5 feet of this or thereabouts, and then steam it, and then kind of clamp it back into place so it'll make permanent that twist and that shape, making it easier and better and more solid for fastening. Great news, gang. It's the afternoon of Christmas Day, and after we had some of our morning celebrations, came outside because it's a real pleasant day, and I just about finished fastening the sheerstrake. And so basically I've just got 2 spots on the each port and starboard sheerstrake to deal with, and that's where it goes into the transom. And so basically I've got the whiskey plank fastened with screws. Now it will be riveted through the sheer clamp, but that's coming up in another couple of sessions.
In sum, I don't think that there's any reason to fear the sheerstrake. I lavished a little bit of detail on this because Chuck Jenkins and Bob Emser did not make the Herreshoff sheerstrake, and so I wanted to provide some kind of visual illustration of that process. I think the key thing is spiling. You've got to adapt your existing spiling process that you use for the rest of the planks on the hull. What you've got to do and I'll link to Sam Allen's site, who built a flatfish and demonstrates this with still photography and text, is you've got to have sort of a flat, regular, thin spiling batten, but then a less wide, kind of a narrow but deep, thicker spiling batten on top of it to kind of mirror the shape and contouring of the Herreshoff sheerstrake. And if you do that in a couple of different pieces to make it lie flat against the frames and station molds, then your spiling is probably going to come out pretty well. I offer one caveat, which is that I have an off again, on again, off again, on again, off again, on again process where I always cut it too big. And the kind of illustrations I've seen really emphasize that they basically get the plank done in, like one shot with very careful spiling. I think you can get close, but for a fairly novice builder like me, it was important to not go too far, basically to shave a little bit off and keep adjusting. So I did that process, which took off some of the stress and some of the pressure from spiling. But using that kind of double layer, thickened, contoured spiling batten was really helpful. Also, switching to mahogany for the material was essential. Made all the difference in the world. I think basically you just take it in steps. First you spile it, then you rough cut it, right? No contouring. When you've got the rough cut, you put it on, and with the same thickness, get it to an acceptable level of sort of closeness to your ninth strake, whether you're still flipped over and upside down or whether you've rolled the boat as I did. And then I took the contouring in a couple of steps as well. Basically, it was kind of an iterative process. Power planing, right? And so you kind of divide the strake into two halves. You can do a first round of planing that just narrows it at the bottom. All right, then you pull out your hand plane and you're going to start contouring it, right? You dig in a little bit. It doesn't need to be super fine, but you do need to start getting some depth, getting some curve, and kind of working your way up from the middle to that top point of what will be more or less the rub rail. The Bray book suggests you could run the uncontoured strake across the table saw at varying depths and kind of rough out the contour, so then you only have to kind of dig in and remove the wood to those set depths. Okay, sanding, right? Like you can do that with a variety of tools to kind of first smooth off the plane work that you did, and then also get a little more aggressive and get a little more precise in meeting the curves of the contour. All right, and then test it out, right? Put it on, clamp it onto your frames and see how it works. Do you need to thin it down, plane it down some more? Do you need to round it some more? Do you need to take some off the top? Like, there's only one way to find out. I'd say the hardest part was dealing with the twist. I had to steam, and the mahogany took steaming fairly well. No real problem with that, even though, of course, the mahogany I bought had already been kind of kiln dried. So it twisted much better with steaming. And then really getting the ends into the rabbet was a real challenge. And basically I steamed, I clamped it in place, and then I kind of shortened the ends, cut it, and finished the contouring. And the very end was kind of uncooperative, so things are a little bit messy. I've still got to go to it with some sandpaper and clean up challenges that made it real tough right at the end when it doesn't want to bend and there's no kind of radius, there's no curvature. As always, I think the hardest part is believing in yourself, proceeding with confidence. There's a lot of chatter about the sheerstrakes, and that had me real nervous, put this off a long time, and I don't think it was really warranted. Maybe I did need some time to kind of get used to the idea, especially getting used to the idea of changing my wood over from the original white oak that I had planned to mahogany, but there was no real task that I couldn't handle. With those in place, it was on to the shear clamps, and that was a pretty straightforward process. You take your long piece of Douglas fir stock and you cut it to height and width, no problem. And then once you have the sheerstrake more or less in place, you measure the angle from the frames to the deck beam mold, right? You take that bevel, and that's the bevel that you're going to cut into the shear clamp. That's a pretty standard, straightforward way that Bob Emser and Chuck Jenkins go about it. I basically just follow their lead. Once you've got that beveled, then it's a big bend. And so what I did was I steamed. My challenge was I had a scarf at about the 18th station frame. And so I couldn't do the whole thing. I saw that Chuck had run into some problem. So I basically steamed all the way till about station frame 16, 17. And then once that was soft, I put it into position, still steaming, and started clamping it so it could bend. And that worked pretty well.
All right, gang. Fans of the channel might remember that 5200 is the worst substance known to humanity. And I'm braving it once again to affix the oak blocks, the raveted blocks back here that the shear clamp will settle into at the transom. I just completed the port side and I'm headed over to the starboard side. Well, here's the block on the starboard side, and 5200 is just as bad to work with as ever.
The only real challenge was fitting it into the oak blocks. And what I think you could do rather than simply steaming is you in fact could spile it. And Peter Buxton has an illustration of this. You would basically know how it works. And that was something that I hadn't really considered, but probably would in my next project. For me, the hard part of the shear clamps was cutting to the right angle where it meets the transom. And I was like shaving things off millimeter at a time because I didn't want to do it too much. And even so, on the starboard side, I cut off a little bit too much and kind of had to fill it with epoxy. And I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. Anyways, I feel I'm moving at nearly light speed now. I also just cut and fitted the breast hook out of mahogany. And so the shear line structure is just about complete, and then I'm going to be able to start working on the deck structure.
across the bay. I see the light not far away, and I hear music all around. I'm getting close to Portland town. So mother, won't you make my bed? I see the light of Portland Head. I see the light. I'm coming round. I'm coming home to Portland town. Some years ago,